Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you let us know where you think we got it right and where we completely missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com or any of our channels. So let's get into it. What do you want to talk about today, Brian?
Well, I think we're on episode 20 now, so congratulations, Dave. You've hit 20 episodes.
Yay, team.
I think we have to get into the role of religion and society and governance and that whole kind of how they have worked hand in hand, how they should kind of, I guess. And I don't know, you and I have talked about this. This might be a one and done episode. It feels like a pretty big topic, though. It might take us a few to get through it, but we're just gonna see where it goes. But first, I want to throw something at you that I've had two experiences in the last month and a half or so that kind of, I think, encapsulate. I'm gonna be as brief as I can, but it's gonna take a minute to kind of explain what I'm talking about. One of these things happened when I say encapsulate, like what this moment is like, and people have heard us talk about how we're going through a change in values, and it's hard to illustrate that. But I think this is a way to do it. It's not exactly apples to apples, but it's peaches and nectarines. It's close enough, I think. So one of them was I was listening to a guy speak, and he had a really compelling story. I don't want to get into the details. I don't want to kind of out him or whatever, but he's a guy really, after listening to him for 45 minutes or an hour, I kind of came to admire. He he was in the military, and he had overcome some real personal strife and life, just bad things happened to him and he overcame. It was a great story. Like the stories that you would hear at motivational seminar kind of thing. It was great. And then he threw this thing out and said something about how because at Halloween we wear costumes where we display scary people, that means we can't have meaningful and honest conversations about mental health. It's like, what?
Okay.
So somehow Halloween, kids dressing up as ghosts and goblins means that we're not able to walk and chew gum at the same time and have a conversation about mental health. Now, I thought that was fascinating, and it just threw me because I'd really come to admire this guy, and I was just kind of like, I try not to throw up my mouth when he said it because I was just like, what? Okay, so fine. And then not too long ago, I did a completely different thing, not even close to the same kind of venue or event or whatever. And somebody was talking about Thanksgiving. And they said, for those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving, hope you have a great one. If there's any Native Americans in the audience, and you're celebrating the National Day of Mourning, we hope that goes as well as it could. Or I don't. It was just odd where we had these things where, in both cases, we took what was, kind of a customarily positive, one's fun, kind of goofy, one's showing gratitude, and we put this real kind of dark, negative spin on it with no purpose other than putting a dark, negative spin on it. Neither of those people, I'm certain, did anything to meaningfully address the issues they were bringing up. The person who was talking about the National Day of Mourning for Native Americans, I promise you this person did not go anywhere and support them in any way on what you and I would call Thanksgiving. And the person who talked about how we can't have a meaningful, impactful conversation about mental health because of dressing up like ghosts. And that person's not volunteering their time at mental health facilities or homeless encampments or whatever. So I apologize for the long-winded thing. What the path, though, the journey we've gone through, and what struck me after hearing the Thanksgiving one was a story I heard when I was a kid from my mom. And I'm probably going to get the details wrong, so I'm not going to get away in the details on it. And this probably happened. I haven't heard this story in 20 years, probably, but so I hope I get it right, and I'll get the meat of it right. But it was it was in Kansas in the 40s, maybe the 50s, probably the 50s, maybe the 40s. And back then nobody locked their door. Like it just, you just didn't do that. Sure. And this is a family who lived, like on a farm kind of thing, situation. and Christmas was coming, and they had no money to buy their kids Christmas gifts. And they were dreading, of course, Christmas coming and like having to tell their kids like there's nothing going to be there. So they waited until the last minute. They weren't going to tell them until Christmas morning, because why ruin the whole season? We're just going to ruin the day.
Right.
We'll wake up in the morning and make the best of it. Well, whatever they were going to do.
Right.
Somebody, and to this day, as far as I know, nobody knows who, somebody went into their house overnight, Christmas Eve, and put gifts for the children in the house.
Nice.
And nobody knows who it was, at least at that time. And that's the story. Now, again, I'm sure there's elements I'm getting wrong, but that's the crux of it. And I thought, this is what it was like back then. Back then, you didn't talk about the thing, you just did the thing, and you didn't make a big deal about getting credit for acknowledging the thing. You just solved the problem.
Yeah.
And now these two people, again, it's not apples and apples, but these two people are not doing anything meaningful as far as like effort, energy, time, money to solve the problem, but them talking about it and quote unquote, creating awareness is like a new catchphrase that we're all hearing.
Yeah.
That somehow makes them virtuous. And it's not the doing now, it's just the talking about it. And it's like back then in 1945 in Kansas, it was you solved the problem. You didn't really talk about solving the problem. And now we talk about needing to solve the problem, but the solving is really somebody else's problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, virtue. I mean, they call that today virtue signaling, because it's more about me and about me adopting a virtuous position than it is doing a virtuous thing. I think, and I think that also comes to the place where we're at as a society. At one point, there was you could say in the 1940s, and, whenever we look back and look at the good things that happened in the past, doesn't mean that there were things that, everything was good. But as a general rule, there were certain things that were believed to be good things among the, human flaws that we had and have always had. And so virtue was kind of an understood thing. Whereas today, the virtue is oftentimes being the one that points out the negative, that looks at the negative, and that looks at the flaws of society, and that looks at the negatives and saying, I'm above the negatives. When some of it, I think, is also, we've talked about the effect of media and social media on the culture before. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that everything is posing. I mean, everything is putting your best and unrealistic foot on or presentation on social media, so that people think you're better than you really are. I mean, I think a lot of that it's rampant throughout society. So I think all of those things come together, and you're right. It does end up, I think, robbing us of true virtue, because virtue in the past would have been follow through. Virtue now, regardless of the outcome, is just saying the approved thing, the thing that says, well, I'm aware, I'm woke, I'm awake to the sufferings of A, B, and C, and even just spinning things like, just going through the Thanksgiving holiday. The first Thanksgiving in 1621 was a wonderful multicultural experience where the Pilgrims and the Indians all had a great time together. There was no mourning. The only mourning was when they ran out of beer, so it's a different time.
I think that the mourning would have been like your land was conquered. And I don't know if this person knows this or not, that in North America is not the first place land was conquered. I'm not sure if this person's aware of that, but history books are full of stories of people being conquered and not conquered.
Right.
I heard something not long ago about people in Ireland still carrying a grudge from the Persians, the Romans from Caesar, Julius Caesar, like going into Ireland and like slaughtering, tens of thousands or whatever. And 2,000 years later, they're still pissed about that, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, I think I've told the story about my visits to Greece and Macedonia, and they're
Yeah.
mad at each other about a disagreement about where Alexander the Great was born,
Right.
2,500 years ago. And no, he's our guy. No, well, it's 25 centuries.
Yeah.
I mean, wherever you go, it's just a matter of people conquering people and one
I
back
thought
and
what was
forth.
interesting, though, again, it's not apples to apples, but I thought what was interesting was when I talk about shift in values, we say that phrase on here a lot, and I've gotten some pushback from some folks on like, what do you mean? And it's hard to kind of put your finger on it, but this is an example of back then what we perceived as the valuable thing, the good thing, the virtuous thing, the moral thing was not in making it about you.
Right.
It was about just doing the right thing. And if you didn't get credit, that's okay. And maybe even preferred.
Yeah.
And now it's the preference is that I get credit as the individual who points out the thing. And there's no value, there's no preference, there's no whatever in me actually solving the problem. If I point out the problem, then it's upon somebody else to actually solve the problem, and I get the stolen virtue for that. But the problem's not solved, and that is a very different way our society works than it did. And again, I keep saying this: it's not apples to apples. I get that, but I think it's a close enough example to kind of show how our priorities are very different based on what we appreciate and our values.
Well, and an interesting point on that too is you probably remember the name Eddie Haskell from Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah,
he's
barely,
yes, Mrs.
barely.
Cleaver.
I
That's
saw
a very
like third generation reruns when I was young. You might have saw him live, but I saw
no,
reruns.
I'm not quite that old. But the interesting thing about Eddie Haskell was he was the one that everybody looked down on because he was posing, because he was, he's really this, not very great guy, but he's always posing as the nice guy. Well, and so in that society, looking down on the people that posed was the common thing. Today, being the poser, being that's the virtuous thing. So it's an exact reversal. Not even not doing the virtuous thing, but the person that's posing is the one that gets the virtue credit, if you will. So Eddie Haskell now rules the day.
Yeah, for sure. So okay, so forgive me for my long-winded diatribe, but this really struck me, and let's move into our topic now of religion and society and governance and like how that's supposed to be or how we wish it would be. And I've had a little bit of time to think about this. I've been kind of kicking this around, and again, for those listening, what we're trying to do here is explain to people in the year 2090-ish what this moment is like. We're speaking to a person we've come to call Kenny G, who's going to be born around the year 2040. And we're just trying to explain what this moment in time is like. And with all the chaos going on and all the frustrations and things like that, we're trying to explain what this is like. And so one of the things that we've heard, Dave and I have heard, is people saying, well, we can't have these conversations without talking about religion. And I agree with that. Religion's a big piece of that because religion establishes the values, right, for many people. And so Dave and I don't do a ton of show prep. I think we've decided that our average show prep is about 1:43.
That's right.
But we do have conversations like we'll just in passing say, hey, in a couple weeks we should probably talk about that, and it gives us time to think about it. So one of the things I've been thinking about was there's kind of these before we get into the religion thing. I think there's two foundational things that we have to acknowledge first, and one is we always want control. We've talked about this a lot, like.
Sure.
Human history is basically the story of who has control.
Right.
And either we were wronged and therefore we're justified in going and taking control from somebody who wronged us, their tribe, or we are superior and therefore we're entitled to having control. And that's the story of human history.
Yep.
Right. So we always want control. And we always want what we don't have. The grass is always greener. If you're a person who lives a boring life, you want an exciting life. If you're a person who has a hectic, exciting life, you wish your life was more tame. If you're there's I don't think there's many exceptions to this. Well over 90% of the time, well over 90% of people at any given moment are wishing they had something they don't have.
Right.
I think that's that's pretty okay. So when you marry those concepts, we end up with always wanting things our way and for things to change to the degree and the pace we want, which seems to remove any possibility for one religion to forever establish a set of values, especially in a diverse culture like ours. When I say diverse, I don't mean skin color and I don't mean that stuff. I mean diverse religions, diverse thoughts, diverse priorities, diverse life experiences, diverse financial situations. I mean,
Sure.
that kind of like true diversity, not the stuff that we're inundated with now. Does that seem to make, before we get to the religion part, does that seem to make sense, Dave? Is that on, you think, or am I missing something there? Where we want control and we always want what we don't have. So we're always evolving what we want, and we expect everyone to evolve at the pace and the degree we want. So it's always a moving target. Like the idea we would have a foundational religion like seems kind of crazy to me just out of the gate.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that's always been true. I think human beings are fundamentally dissatisfied with their own lives and the comparison of their own life to the whatever the ideal is, and we're even more dissatisfied with the way other people live their lives than we are
Right.
even with our own life. So
if people just do what I want, my life would be a lot easier, right?
if you'd only do what I say, then it would be easier for me to do what I say too. But
Right.
we don't end up in that spot. So I think that's a pretty good description of the human condition. And also I think you hit it when you say that the values, the fact that we don't share and other people don't share our values is part of our great dissatisfaction, and it's also a great part of the reason that we focus so much on them, because we don't always behave according to our own values fully. But
right.
They're worse. Those guys out there, they're worse.
I should get grace when that happens, and you should be held accountable when you do it.
Yes, and that's particularly true in tribal values too. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at my tribe, we'll just take a fundamental one, the conservative movement, and we are much more forgiving of those of our tribe than we would be if they committed the exact same offense and they're part of another tribe.
Right.
So and that goes back and forth. So there's that tribalism penetrates that as well. So yes, that's all part of the human condition. I think it's fundamental operating system for human beings.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this before with the tribalism. Like when it's my team, the intent is what matters.
Yes.
When it's their team, it's the outcome that matters.
Right. Or even
we are not consistent on that.
Well, or even the past performance. So if we've had good past performance on my team, but now we have a transgression, it's like, well, look at the good past performance. If on their team, it's like they've got good past performance, but now we found something we can catch them on. We got them now. Right. We finally got them because they've never done this before, but now they're in trouble.
The technicality reigns supreme when it's the other team.
Absolutely.
But we deserve grace because our intent was good, even though it came out wrong. We meant well, so it's okay. And when I was thinking about this, like the idea, like we always want control, and so if we had an established religion, let's say that Christianity was established as the religion. Well, we are always evolving, and we always want things our way. So we would not be satisfied with a national religion.
No,
it would not take long until the Mormons were fighting the Jehovah's Witnesses, were fighting the Baptists, were fighting the Catholics. Like human history is full of examples where everyone is the same-ish, but then tribalism breaks out. Literally, in the case of our continent, there were I don't know. You probably know this better than I do. There was at least a few hundred tribes, Native American tribes, right?
Yeah.
Now nowadays we lump them all together as one kind people who everything was going, like life was good for all of them, and they were kind to each other and they loved each other. Then we showed up and we ruined everything, right?
Yeah.
That's not exactly how it worked. There was tribes of people who fought for centuries.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And even though they had many commonalities in how they saw things, they had unique differences about opinions and values of things that caused them to war with each other.
Yep.
And I don't think that would, if we had a national religion, I don't think that would be any different for us. It would maybe be not as barbaric, but it would be a little more sophisticated. Maybe not. I don't know.
Probably not.
But probably not. Yeah. But the same things would happen. So the idea of a national religion to me, just before we even get into the details, like out of the gate, to me just sounds kind of utopian and absurd.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want, I'm a very religious person, and I do not want a national religion, a
Yeah,
governmentally imposed, here's a story from religious history. So I'm of the Protestant persuasion. So there was for 1500-ish years, the Christian religion was dominated by Catholicism,
yeah,
in generally speaking. So the Martin Luther and the Protestants came along and said, we're not going to be Catholics anymore, and the Pope and all that stuff's no good. And then there was the Protestant faith. Well, some of the major players in the Protestant faith, there was Martin Luther. There's a fellow by the name of John Calvin. Well, John Calvin, who a lot of folks take a lot of the principles from today, when he had political power, and when in a certain village, somebody who disagreed with him on and I won't go through the whole story, but somebody who disagreed with him on doctrinal issues came to town and he said, and Calvin said, I can't guarantee your safety if you come to town because you believe this bad stuff. And he got killed. He got
yeah,
burned. He got burned to death.
yeah,
So
yeah.
no, I don't want a political national religion. It scares me as much as it would not having any faith at all.
Yeah. And so one of the things I was thinking about, again, knowing we were going to have this conversation, was what is a religion? And so I didn't Google it. I didn't look up a definition in a dictionary. I just kind
Sure.
of said, I sat down for 10 minutes, like, well, what do you think religion is? And I came up with something like this: a collection of beliefs, customs, norms, values with embraced, tolerated, and rejected behaviors centered around an explanation for our existence, our purpose, aka the meaning of life, and what happens when we die.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of established norms, customs, and accepted behaviors and unaccepted behaviors, and a bunch of stuff in between. Right. So no matter what, it's always going to kind of be like high school, in that there's an in group, whoever's tribe is in control, and
Sure.
and they're the in group because their values are the ones that the society more or less has said these are the ones we accept and celebrate, I guess.
Right.
And then there's kind of the fringe. There's always the fringe, right?
Sure.
So if you grew up if you went to high school like me, there was guys who were, they were maybe dropping acid out in the parking lot or whatever. They were kind of on the fringe,
The
right?
fringe, yeah.
The guys who were kind of nerdy and whatever. Well, if you went to a different high school, the nerds might be the guys who were the norm, and the jocks might be the guys who were out. And it kind of feels like no matter what, you're going to have that situation to a degree. So
Yeah.
the ideal, it seems, would be to find the most if we want to be inclusive, which is the word that's like
Right.
thrown at us 87 times a day, you'd want to find the religion that is the most accepting of a wide variety. But that's not what we're experiencing in this moment. By
Right.
my definition of religion, this kind of green, anti traditional religion, as like, Jewish, Islam, Christianity, like those traditional kind of religions, like anti that, Mother Earth reigns supreme. We should be eating bugs and not steak because of whatever emissions comes
Right.
from cows and whatever. Like that religion, which is a religion by my definition,
Sure it
is
is. Yeah.
not very tolerant of anybody who has a different opinion.
Well, and that goes, and I like your definition. I really love your definition. So the way that I think about religion, whether it is and I'll define it this way also, I'll say whether it is a theistically based religion, which means it believes in a creator, a God, whether it's the God of Christianity or the God of Islam or whatever God. So those are theistically based religions. There are atheistic religions as well, ones that have no God. There's
Right.
Buddhism as a religion there's some theism, there's some atheist Buddhist.
Yeah.
But part of that, and so the one thing I would add to that is all religions have to have basically three things. And you mentioned two of them in particular. I'll mention a third. So it's got to have an origin story. It's like, why do we exist? What's our origin? It's got to have a destination story. It's got to have something that says, after we die, there's nothing, there's something, here's what the something is, etc. But there's one other component that's critical in any religion, whether it's a theistic or atheistic religion, and that is an explanation for evil. So if you take a look
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
both the explanation and the way that we interact with evil. So you mentioned, for instance, some of the modern religions. So you could say, radical environmentalism is a religion. It talks about there's an origin story. Earth is all Mother Earth. There's a destination story, which Earth has got to survive whether we do or not. It's not all that important. And there is a great most of what is prescribed, morally speaking, then is anything that harms Mother Earth is evil. So it's not
Right.
just that, you shouldn't be littering. That's not a really good thing because, Brian and
Yeah.
Dave, they don't like to see litter on the ground. Or it's not just about fossil fuels because, fossil fuels would be great if we can transition off of fossil fuels into something that's less, polluting and all that. No, if you don't abide by the Green New Deal, if you don't subscribe to, Her Holiness Greta's pronouncements on
Yeah.
what needs to happen,
Well,
you're
she
not
is
just bad,
15,
you're
Dave.
evil.
She's far wiser than me. So
Well,
I
now
mean,
she's
she's got that going
21, so
for her.
now she's an adult. We
Oh,
can pay
okay.
attention.
Sorry.
So I'm sure plenty of people are going to get mad at me for saying something about Greta.
Yeah.
But but the point is that it's not just here's some better policy prescriptions on how we can treat the world and how we can all be better off as human beings, et cetera, et cetera. It's, it's not just that. It's why do people freak out about certain snail darters or spotted owls or whatever? It's actually, you have to understand it within the confines of how is evil understood and how is it dealt with. And every religion, whether again it's theistic or atheistic, whether it's philosophical or whether it's traditional, has a way of understanding evil and then prescriptions for addressing that. So if you take a look at the conflict in the Middle East right now, there's no consistency between one side and the other. One side it describes evil one way, the other side describes evil in a completely different way. There's no meeting of the minds. It can't even come together. And so this is why religions are fundamentally at war with one another throughout human history.
And I like what you added there. I called it a behaviors that are rejected. I think I like evil better. I think I like what you're saying. That makes more sense to me. I think that one of the things that we're seeing is, you and I've talked about how, Judeo-Christian religion, kind of those kinds of values driven ideals, I guess, or ideologies or whatever. One of the fundamental cornerstones of that is I am in the cause of most of my problems. Even if I was dealt a bad hand, if it's really rotten, I'm probably the culprit for most of the problems I'm facing,
right.
even if I was dealt a bad hand.
Yep.
And I think that keeps at bay the more so than other religions. Again, using our definition, doesn't mean it has to be one of the big three or one of the big seven or whatever. Like, again, the modern green thing I would consider religion.
Right.
But if the underlying belief is that I'm the cause of most of my problems and my effort should be spent fixing me, not everybody else,
right,
that kind of keeps at bay this attacking what I perceive as evil based on my values. But in a live and let live kind of world that we would all, I think, want, which has its own set of values, to have a society where you would have a live and let live world. They don't have that in Afghanistan, for example, or Syria. That's not what they're aiming for. But we kind of have this, American live and let live kind of thing we say, and we've always kind of believed in my lifetime. But if the work I need to do to make the world a better place is fixing me versus fixing them, that kind of keeps at bay that hardcore desire to go fix evil in somebody else, and it produces, I would argue, a better society.
Yeah.
Even for people who don't like religion in a traditional sense, like who are atheists, let's say, they have a better life experience in a situation like that than a situation where they are the problem and it's upon me to go fix them.
And there's plenty of atheists, some of the people I respect the most that I disagree with a significant amount, who would say they would rather live in a Christian society than in one that's fully atheist. And part of that, and you're right, I think part of the the distinction there is this idea in the biblical religions is this idea of original sin, of human beings having a being born with not just imperfection, but being born with selfishness. Whereas if you take a look at some of the more modern religions that say, no. If there's any sin or any problem or any negativity in a human being, it's because of external forces. We're all born in the biblical worldview. We're born with selfish and sinful and selfish being sinful. Intentions and motivations. We cry, we make things annoying for our parents as much as we can so we get what we want. Whereas in the more sort of humanistic, if you will, no, you're born perfect. You're born as a blank slate. And if you're corrupt at all, if there's any corruption in your life at all, it's because you had corrupting influences on the outside. That's why we can never, blame anybody. We can, and if somebody has something that is negative on society, it's not their fault. It's never their fault.
Right.
And
their parents screwed them up, or their parents' friends, or their parents' generation, or the school, or
colonialism.
Society at large. The things that we can't see, but we know they exist because life is bad, and therefore, if there's no God-centered religion that explains the origin must mean that we were perfect, like you're saying, and everybody else screwed us up and makes our life miserable.
And it also points to the destiny question. So the ultimate destiny question. So if people are fundamentally selfish or fundamentally flawed from the moment that we're born, from the moment we're conceived, if we're fundamentally that way, then the way that we're going to treat evil in the world, the way that we're going to treat our ultimate destiny also is going to be colored, if you will, by this understanding of what the base material is right here. Whereas if we are born as perfected individuals, and therefore anything that's negative in us is coming from outside, then we're going to have this belief that we can fix society. We're going to have this utopian belief that all we have to do is have the right policy, the right program, and the homeless person on the street can attain to the same thing that the PhD that's running Harvard, can attain to, or whatever else it happens to be.
Or we just take enough stuff from the Harvard guy to give it to the homeless guy, so it's all equal again.
Exactly.
Well, nobody says we're going to have lots of things, Dave. They just say we have the same amount.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, and see, this is where reality then ultimately comes back and bites that second world view, because it's never happened before. This idea of imperfect humans has played out over and over and over throughout all of human history. Selfish humanity has played out over and over and over. But this other idea, the modern idea of if we only apply the right policy prescriptions, we can fix all of our problems and achieve this utopian vision for individuals and for society. It's never happened, and it's because it's a false, and this is it's not a false religion because I say it's a false religion. It's a false religion because it never does and can work.
Yeah. What for places like North Korea where the whatever his title is, what's Kim Jong
the dear leader. Yes. He's and he's the party chairman and all that.
Okay, so like a guy like him, or in Iran, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't understand their politics very well, but like in Iran, you have the council of people who are the theologians, and also they run the government and the church, basically, right?
Yep.
Those, or even just communist China, like Chairman Xi or whatever.
Yep.
Those feel to me to be no different than the kings from, let's say, 782 AD,
sure.
The king who was thought to be not only the ruler of the government, but also like a deity.
Yeah, the divine right of kings.
Yeah. So am I missing something there? Would you say that there's a correlation there, or what's the difference? I guess that's a better way of asking you. What's the difference between a king, in France in 782 or 1400 BC or whatever? Pick the right time frame.
Yeah.
I don't know the history like you do. Versus a North Korean dictator today or the Iranian council that is the dictators today, what's the difference, or is there one?
No, there really isn't any difference. I mean, so if you look at, let's take Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather, they've been deified for, what, my dad was in North Korea, in the Korean War in 1950 in 70 some odd years ago.
Yeah.
And they've been essentially deified by intentionally so they can maintain control. Because and it turns out that human beings like to have some central human authority that they can look at and vest all of their hopes in the physical world for their own betterment, and they can just we have the Seahawks in Seattle. Maybe that's where I don't know if they falls in the same category, but it's something like that. But jokes aside, no, that's throughout human history, we have as a species liked to have these things. There's a story in the Bible back in, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and the God said, I'm not going to give you a king. I'm going to give you these judges. They're going to help run things. It's kind of like a Congress, if you will. And the people said, no. We like these kings out here that all these other nations have. Give us a king. We want a king. And God said, kings are going to screw you up all 7 ways till Sunday. You really, no, we want a king. We got to have a king.
We always want what we don't have, Dave. We always want what we don't have.
We always want what we don't have. And he gave him a king, and they got all screwed up. And so but but that's what they've got in Iran. And that's what with the Ayatollahs and the Council of Imams and all of that stuff. That's what we've always had.
What about like a modern China? Is it the same? I mean, the political party is the religion, essentially.
Yeah.
And the leader of the political party has ultimate say in everything, like everything, to the degree that we probably cannot even imagine, especially if you happen to be a poor Uyghur who's born the wrong religion.
Right.
They literally like dictate everything. Like you're a slave, more or less. Is that a stretch to say that a modern communist leader in modern communist China today is not that much different from one of those kings back in the old, or queens back in the old day, who were a deity / government ruler?
It's playing on the same,
right?
It's playing on the same set of emotions, playing on the exact same set of emotions.
But the structure of how the society sees that person is the same. It's not a new thing.
Right.
It's just a different label, and it's communism instead of having a king in France in 483 AD or whatever. It's basically the king decided the religion.
Yep.
The king had the ultimate say. The king was a deity, and that's what they have in China, and that's what they have in Iran, and that's what they have. It's a different religion. It's different country. It's different geographic area, but it's the same process.
It is, and so it manifests in both what's good for you physically. In other words, to be in China, to be a party adherent, to be a loyal party adherent. So that's their tribe. It also then, and what's happening in China right now is fascinating because they, for many years under Mao, they had Karl Marx, it's the opiate of the people. The religion is bad. We don't want any religion. Well, they kind of realized, Xi and his people realized that religion is a fundamental part of human beings' lives. And so essentially when the current, there's also, about 500 million Buddhists, and their Tibetan Buddhism is run by the Dalai Lama. Well, Dalai Lama is 88 years old, and China has set up a whole set of rules around the next Dalai Lama. They've got basically departments around reincarnation. What is legal reincarnation now?
Yeah.
And so because China has realized that this human emotion around religion is a very powerful thing to control. So they've created a bunch of communist lamas and sent them out to all the monasteries throughout the country, and are setting up, when the current Dalai Lama dies, there's going to be 2 Dalai Lamas. There's going to be the one that is the successor to the current Dalai Lama that's through Tibetan Buddhism, and there's going to be a Chinese communist Dalai Lama that is going to then hopefully they hope is going to help control 500 million Chinese Buddhists or that are under the control.
Listen, as the guy who's had dozens of employees at more than one time, I gotta give the Chinese credit for thinking of everything.
Oh, well, they have. They've thought of everything. They've
got everything covered, man.
Well, when they've got a department, when they've got a series of written
Oh,
laws
geez.
covering how you are allowed to reincarnate.
To reincarnate, that's pretty awesome. Like they don't,
It's
no stone unturned.
No stone unturned. You got to give it to him. He's smart.
So my point with going on this comparing old school kings to modern dictators. I kind of feel like people look at this like it's a new thing, and to me, it's like it's just the same thing with a different skirt on. Like it's the same thing. It's not any different.
No.
If you, I've seen interviews of Chinese people who say they have the most democracy of anywhere on the planet, and they're not lying. Right. They believe it.
They believe it. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
It's a matter of perspective, and it's. I hear people talk about like communism and socialism like they're this new thing. They're not a new thing. No. It's the same thing we had literally 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. We call it different things, but it's a deity / master governor who makes all the rules, which is convenient because we want to be taken care of as people.
Yes. Yep.
We don't want to have responsibility. We want someone else to take care of us.
Right.
Until it infringes upon the amount of freedom we think we should have, and then we get pissy about it.
And we want to be told what's right and what's wrong in clear, unambiguous terms.
Yeah.
So that we can feel good about ourselves, because we want to, everybody wants to feel good about themselves. And if somebody says, here's the 8 things, you do these 8 things and you're going to be a good person, then, people, oh yeah, we'll do these 8 things, so why do we've talked about cult leaders I think in the past, but maybe we have, I don't know. But why do people follow cults and do bizarre things? Because they want to believe in something, they want to believe in somebody, and they want to believe in something that makes them feel fulfilled. We all want to be fulfilled. That's natural. And that's what
virtuous.
happens.
Don't forget the virtuous part. You got to be virtuous. Yeah.
Exactly right.
So we kind of have these options, I guess. You could have this modern version of kings, God kings. Again, we have examples of those around the world now. We have a tolerant kind of Judeo-Christian, but a society that more or less adopts Christian values and Christian principles. What are the other options besides those two? What else is out there in the world today, Dave, besides like you and I have grown up in a world with Judeo-Christian values that's pretty tolerant of everyone? Again, there's the fringe people that are doing their thing. That's not really, it's not what we're looking for, but we tolerate it to a certain degree. Some things we don't tolerate, of course, but there's always going to be an out crowd. My point is there's always an out crowd.
Yeah.
It's just a degree of how much tolerance there is for people who are out. So you and I are lamenting that the one we liked is going away, it feels like. We have this other option where there's the God King that we see in Iran and Venezuela and places like that now. What else is there?
Well, and so some of it depends on whether you're focused primarily on life having meaning because you're following the do's and don'ts of the moral part of it, or some of it depends on so you can even take the ones that are the more top down approaches of like Iran and some of those places and say the of the big 3, origin, meaning of evil, how you should live your life, and destiny, the apocalyptic religions, the ones that are all about, nothing matters except for getting to the 72 virgins. I'm picking on one in particular right now of the radical Islam. It's so apocalyptic that nothing matters except for getting to that. Then that one is even differentiated from the ones like, I don't think Kim Jong-un in North Korea, very top down, I don't think he wants people blowing themselves up and, he wants to maintain his power. He's interested in that.
Yeah.
The apocalyptic religion of the Ayatollahs, looking for the 12th Imam to come, the great, end times person who's going to subjugate the entire world. Any violation of shared morality of the world or of any morality is valuable if it hastens the arrival of the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, all of that type
Right.
of thing. So that's a part of it too. And then you've got there's the more sort of cerebral religions. There's the Buddhism, and
Well, let me rephrase my question. What I'm asking is, aside from the God King model, which we see in these places, like you've mentioned some, and kind of the more democratic, Judeo-Christian,
right,
whatever you want to call that, tolerant. We have values. We prefer, like, in 1950, they wouldn't have liked gay marriage very much. It was very traditional, biblical kind of stuff. But the way the religion and governance coexisted was we allow things, we're tolerant of things, we don't prefer them, but we don't go burn you at the stake for that stuff like they do in places where there's God Kings right now.
Right.
Is there anything else, or is it just those two? Is that all that there is in the world? Is those two things, or is there something else that is out there also besides those two specific kinds of arrangements?
I think most of it's a variation on one of those two themes to one degree or another. The sort of the more libertarian, sort of new agey kind of ones, like but and then
Sweden, maybe Sweden's kind of they're just kind of agnostic to everything. It feels like.
Well, they're just polite. They're kind of like Canadians, I guess. They're European Canadians. They
just want your money. Like, to become a Swedish citizen, you just have to give them like 80% of your stuff, and then you're good.
Yeah, they're just kind of more friendly, polite, blonde people. That's an overgeneralization. Yeah. Well, the other one then I think is there is the one that kind of exalts over everything, learning and knowledge, to the exclusion of everything else. Sort of, you might call it a humanistic, atheistic belief in science as religion. And so there is that. And as
how
well.
How do those work with like, if you were to explain to me, like, I'm a 5-year-old, because intellectually I am sometimes, how does that work with a government? Like, what do they do in relationship with the government? How do they get along or not get along? What are the rules, like that kind of thing?
Well, you still come up with an origin, meaning of evil, and destination kind of motif, because in that scenario, objective learning is the only thing that really matters. And evil is when you contradict the current set of priesthood maybe they're scientists, maybe they're whoever the elites are, the elite learning people at the top of society who've got the greatest degrees and the greatest amount of learning.
So how do they treat people who don't like learning in that environment then?
Well, they're the heretics. They're the blasphemers.
Do they harm them? Do they kick them out, or they just like tolerate them? And they're like the people who were the gay couples in 1956 who were just kind of frowned upon, but people avoided them. But they didn't burn them at the stake.
They're probably not going to be burned at the stake, but they might lose their job and they might be excluded from civil society. Okay. They might be excommunicated. So, the people, the rubes might be excommunicated from civil society.
The only other examples I can think of, like, there's countries in the Caribbean, like Anguilla. It's an island that's either got 14,000 people living in a 16-mile long island, or there's 16,000 people living in a 14-mile long island. I can't remember which it is. Very small. Yeah. They have no army. They have no nut. They're just like come see, come stop, and everything. Right. Because if they got invaded, like, what are they going to do? Like, they just, but it's a country that has like 15,000 people, and they're next to St. Martin, which is half Dutch and half French, but they just kind of exist. They have traditions, and they have, beliefs and whatever, but there's not even really, I mean, there's a government in the sense that they declare they have a border, and they run a ferry system, and they have streets and stuff like that. There's, and they presumably have religious beliefs, different kinds, but there's like, it's almost like, it's not quite it's not quite anarchy,
right?
But it feels kind of like loosely held together, let's say. There's examples like Grenada might be another example, or Turks and Caicos. I don't know. There's like these island countries that are like so small that I don't think that's scalable, I guess, is my point.
Well, no, like, and it's also, I mean, my theory is, and this is just a theory, my theory is too, it's a lot easier to do that when you're in a place that's a temperate climate with food around you and not too many neighbors to annoy you. You're not in
always eat mangoes, bananas, no matter what.
Right. I mean, so if you're in sub-Saharan Africa, that's a hard place to live. or if you're in Finland in 500 AD, where or Denmark, so why did the Vikings come from Denmark and those kinds of places? Well, it was hard to live, and so it produced hard people. Whereas a friend of mine, he visited one of the islands in the Central Pacific, and he said he couldn't find a chair, and he asked people, well, why is there no chairs? What do you need a chair for? Sit on the ground. It's like, well,
need a chair for?
Chill, cool. The ground's warm. There's sand. I get some bananas. I can.
So there's these very small locations where there's just like loosely held together things. Yeah. It's not. They're not figuring out what rules should apply to reincarnation. That's
not
for sure.
Not terrible amounts of oppression, because there's not too many people to oppress them or be oppressed. So.
Right, and the rewards for oppressing people are pretty limited. We have a population of 14,000 or whatever. There's not a whole lot of benefit in putting in the work in to oppress people at that point.
That's probably utopia.
Other than those three things, you got the God King, you got kind of a society like ours, and you got these like very loosely held together things.
Yeah.
Are there where there's like no point in harming people, and like I'm sure that people just like leave if they don't fit in or whatever. Are there other examples of government and religion kind of existing in a different marriage, so to speak, than the ones we've covered so far?
I think they're all degrees of those things, more benign and more and more tyrannical, degrees of those things. There's, the more commonality exists in any particular group, whether it's cultural or racial or whatever, I think the more, the more people are around you that are like you and that think like you, the easier it is to get along. I mean, so this is.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. And the reason I'm really diving into this is because I think that there's a perception that there's like 43 different kinds of ways religion and government could interact.
No.
And I think there's only like maybe 5 that we've seen throughout history. I don't think there's this wide variety of different ways it could work. There's either the God King model, there's the what we call democratic model, which is, there's a unspoken in some cases, spoken in others, but there's an established kind of set of norms and rules and customs that we all kind of follow. And some people aren't, and that's fine, but we don't crucify them like literally or burn them at the stake. Where other places where there's the God King, they will crucify them and burn them at the stake.
Right.
And there's even more quote unquote democratic ones where there's more like the group of people making decisions, not one singular person, where they will burn people at the stake there too. But that's kind of it. Like that's the options. There's not. Well, let's try number 27. Like there is no number 27.
No, well,
there's like 3 to 5.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on how much I think you get it to be a bureaucratized scenario, or whether how much you get it to be a centralized around a person or a set of just a few people. The more bureaucratized it is, the harder it is for them to do damage.
Yeah, and I think that evil piece that you touched on really is important, because when you marry that up with the concept that I am the cause of most of my problems, and that is the evil that must be fought, versus they are the cause of most of my problems, and they are the evil must be fought. Those are very different societies.
Yeah, well, and the one where the individual has responsibility for their own and knowledge and belief in their own personal flaws and weaknesses, and they're trying to better themselves, that is the safest model of all for society. Because if you believe that you're right and everybody else is wrong, and therefore anything you need to do to make them right is justified, that's when you have people burning people at the stake. And that's when you have them, doing the things that happen in these conflicts in the Middle East. That's the problem.
My favorite story to illustrate what you're talking about is the guy who was in Guantanamo, and Islam is the religion of peace, is what's been like said for a long time now, right? And there was a guy in Guantanamo who was like a terrorist, like a legit like he was responsible for the USS Cole bombing or something like that. I don't know what it was. And there was an interrogator there that asked him, like, you've done these, like, you've killed, like, harshly, like, hurt and killed, like, lots of people. How can you say that Islam is a religion of peace? And the guy said, well, when everyone's either been enslaved, converted, or killed, there'll be peace.
There's peace, yeah. There you go. So it depends on how where you start from. That's exactly right.
All right. So I think we got a pretty good baseline understanding of like what the options are. And next week we can get into maybe like, when Dave is decreed the czar of how religion and governance shall be intertwined, what would his utopia look like? Maybe we'll get into that. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But I think it was important to illustrate to Kenny G, the guy who's alive in 2090, the path we've been on and why this feels so odd to us that we grew up in a world of seemingly tolerance. Again, there's always going to be people who are out. There's always going to be people who reject and rebel, and there's going to be different degrees of reactions to that.
Right.
Okay, we get that. That's human nature, because they don't want to be controlled any more than we do.
Right. Exactly.
They want to live their own lives too. But there was a lot of tolerance, and now what we're being told was intolerant. Then is being like the consequences of supporting that old quote unquote intolerance that you and I are sitting here saying was pretty damn tolerant. The consequences are pretty heavy handed compared to what you and I grew up with.
Yeah.
And that is what is feeling weird about this.
Yes.
Is not only the change in how we treat people, treat the evil, and treat the people who disagree with us, but what our definition of tolerance is and how much should be allowed and all that kind of stuff. That's the part that is hard to wrap our heads around, honestly.
It is
for me.
Yep, me too.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, like Dave said earlier, especially this topic. Geez, there's a ton of things we could have got wrong from your perspective. For those of you who are around when we're around in the year 2023 right now, please tell us where we're describing what this moment is like incorrectly, and especially on a topic like this, there's going to be all kinds of opinions on where Dave and I completely blew this, and that's fine. That's the point of this, is to explain to Kenny G from all of our perspective what this moment is like. What did we miss here? What did we get wrong on this options for how religion and governance can be intertwined? And are there things that we missed? We'd love to hear your opinion. You can go to unsilentpodcast.com, or you can also go to our Rumble channel. By the way, when you go to the Rumble channel, like do the thing, like it's Dave and Brian against the algorithm. Like click the like thing, subscribe, do this comment, do this stuff. And oh, by the way, you can share this with a friend too. Like you can tell people we're doing this. We've talked about like if each of us just did one thing to fight the thing we're up against. Well, your one thing this week could be just sharing this podcast with a friend. So anyhow, go to unsilentpodcast.com or go to that Rumble channel, comment on the video, tell us where we got it right, tell us where we got it wrong. We'd love to hear your opinion. And with that, that's it for this week, and we'll talk to you all next week.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.